Last week, we covered the failed third Japanese attempt at retaking the important island of Guadalcanal. The unmitigated disaster that was the battle for Henderson Field would prove to be the last attempt of the invaders to contest the Americans in what they believed to be the most decisive campaign of the war. Yet at the same time, 2 American carriers would take on 4 Japanese carriers in a battle that would decide the fate of the Japanese garrison on this island of death. In a theatre decided by air power, join us as we delve into the 4th carrier battle of the Pacific War, the crucial Battle of the Santa Cruz Islands. We'll first point out that when it comes to geopolitical conquests and imperial ambition, the immense suffering it inflicts on those involved renders it a real evil of the world. However, the interesting elements of it can make for a great game, in the literal sense, and in particular this video is sponsored by Conflict of Nations. It's a free, real-time grand strategy game where you compete with other players for global domination over the modern world. You take a real country into slow-paced, weeks-long games with up to 128 players, using that time to strategize in extreme detail, conduct diplomacy with the other players, develop over 250 research projects, and build over 100 advanced weapon systems like tanks, jets, and nuclear submarines. You'll also handle your economy and population, keep morale high, or use terrifying weapons of mass destruction to cripple your rivals. Since the game is always ongoing, it's great that you can check it on both PC and mobile to stay up to date on any geopolitical developments affecting your plans. Get the game via our link in the description to get an exclusive gift, 13,000 gold and 1 month of premium subscription for free, but only for the next 30 days, so act now. Before we go to Guadalcanal to cover the carrier battle that was looming on the horizon, we first need to travel to New Guinea to see an often overlooked engagement of the Pacific War. Back in late August, we'll recall that during the invasion of Milner Bay, some 353 SNLF Marines, under Commander Tsukioka Torishige, had been left stranded at Goodenough Island when 9 Australian Kittyhawks destroyed all 7 of their landing barges, their radios, and most of its stores. Admiral Kinkade then attempted to rescue them on September 10th, but his destroyers were attacked by some Allied bombers that managed to sink the Yayoi. With their strength waning each day due to low rations and outbreaks of malaria, the SNLF Marines were kept alive through airdrops of supplies and food. Additionally, the submarine I-1 dropped off supplies and a radio on October 3rd, taking 71 sick or wounded back to Rabaul. Meanwhile, as General MacArthur continued to prepare his counter-offensive on New Guinea, Milner Force was directed to occupy and hold Goodenough Island and the south of Cape Nelson to deny their use by enemy forces. Thus, General Clowes appointed the 2nd 12th Battalion of Lieutenant Colonel Arthur Arnold to undertake Operation Drake, with the objective of destroying all Japanese forces on the island. On October 22nd, the Drake force was transported to Goodenough Island by Task Force 44, finally arriving that same night. To trap the Japanese, Arnold would land one small force of 120 men at Taleba Bay, while the bulk of his battalion landed at Mud Bay. The Australians would then set out on a grueling march under a violent thunderstorm towards Kilia, but they would make very slow progress. At 08:30 on October 23rd, as they crossed a creek in front of a steep hill, Arnold's men were ambushed with a strong grenade attack that forced him to pull back. He would later reform and continue his drive to Kilia, but with Japanese aircraft strafing his positions and casualties mounting up, Arnold at last decided to press his attack on October 24th. Meanwhile, the Taleba Bay force rapidly managed to drive the enemy from near Bulu Creek, but a series of heavy Japanese counterattacks finally pushed them back all the way to Taleba Bay, where they would have to board the Stuart to escape getting overrun. With the Australian forces unable to advance, the Japanese would withdraw during the night, successfully arriving at the nearby Ferguson Island by October 25th. From there, 261 survivors would finally be rescued by the light cruiser Tenryu the following day. Meeting no opposition, Arnold's men would then go on to swiftly secure the island. Now we can finally turn to the Solomon Islands, where a new naval engagement was brewing. Concurrent with the fighting to the south of Edson's Ridge, Admiral Yamamoto had been planning to draw Allied naval forces into what he hoped would be a truly decisive battle for the Japanese, unlike the disaster that Midway had been. With 5 carriers fully equipped with air groups, and numerous battleships, cruisers and destroyers, the largest force yet committed to this day, Yamamoto was confident that he could destroy any American fleet attempting to intervene. Yet his plan was also based on the notion that the 2nd Division would successfully capture Henderson Field. Once he received word that the airfield was under Japanese control, then Yamamoto's support force would swing into action. Admiral Kondo's advance force, consisting of 2 carriers, 2 battleships, and a large number of cruisers and destroyers, would transit east of Malaita Island and then move into the Guadalcanal area to mop up any American forces there. Meanwhile, Admiral Nagamo's 3rd Fleet, formed around the fleet carriers Shokaku and Zuikaku and the light carrier Zuiho, would cover Kondo's left flank until the advance force reached its final position southeast of Guadalcanal. Both forces would be separated by a distance of about 100 miles, so that any one plane couldn't discover both at the same time, and another 100 miles to the south would be Rear Admiral Abe Hiroaki's vanguard force, consisting of 2 battleships with more cruisers and destroyers. In the meantime, Admiral Halsey had taken command of the South Pacific area, immediately deciding to go on the offensive to relieve the threat to Vandegrift's Marines. Whereas Admirals Fletcher and Gormley had conservatively deployed their carriers out of Japanese air search range, thus relying on their long-range PBYs to provide them with warning, Halsey instead planned to move north of the Santa Cruz Islands in an aggressive search for Japanese forces. If nothing was encountered, then he would continue forward to strike Japanese shipping in the Shortland Islands anchorage. For this task, he selected Rear Admiral Thomas Kinkade's Task Force 61, mainly built around the carriers Hornet and the recently repaired Enterprise. On October 21st, as Hyakutake prepared to launch his offensive, Yamamoto suffered his first setback when an engine room fire broke out on Hio, forcing the carrier to return to Truk for repairs. On October 22nd and 23rd, with the 2 subsequent delays for the launch of the attack on Henderson Field, Yamamoto's support force would also have to turn north and south again twice, giving American PBYs the opportunity to spot Nagamo's vanguard force and one of his carriers. Now aware of strong enemy forces in the area, Halsey then directed Task Force 64 to assemble northeast of Espiritu Santo by October 24th. At the same time, Nagamo also knew that his forces had been spotted. As the support force turned north for a second time on October 24th, the uncertain Nagamo decided to continue north beyond what Yamamoto had ordered, thus leaving Kondo unaware that he was sailing back south alone. Yet this delay didn't go down well with Yamamoto, and he would order Nagamo to hastily reverse course to the south to join the attack. Finally, on October 25th, Hyakutake's offensive had started, and we'll recall that he would be falsely informed about the fall of Henderson Field. Although Japanese fighters over Guadalcanal would rapidly discover that this was not the case, Yamamoto would order Kondo to turn north once again after he received this news. Concurrently, long-range American search aircraft were doing some excellent work, and by midday, their PBYs and B-17s had spotted Kondo's advance force, Abe's vanguard force, and all 3 of Nagamo's carriers. With this new information at hand, Admiral Kinkade and his staff were pondering possible actions when Halsey interrupted them with some orders that would electrify the entire American Navy. Strike, repeat, strike. Yet the Japanese were well beyond Kinkade's striking range, so he would have to increase his speed to 27 knots to reduce their distance. Inexplicably, Kinkade would then select Enterprise's inexperienced air group for an afternoon strike, and out of the 35 aircraft that were selected to launch at 1400, only 19 planes would depart by 1425. Additionally, some B-17s had decided to bomb Abe's vanguard force, which was now retreating north out of the American range. In the end, the Enterprise's planes sought the enemy farther than intended, leaving them short on fuel and forcing them to request a disastrous night recovery, in which 8 aircraft were lost. For the remainder of the day, Enterprise would handle all search and patrol duties with its remaining planes, while Kinkade continued to drive northwards and the Japanese turned south once again. Thus, a confrontation was looming on the horizon. During the early hours of October 26th, Enterprise's PBYs still searched for the enemy position. By 0300, the seaplanes had located the vanguard force and the carrier Zuikaku, then attempting to execute some unsuccessful glide bombing runs over them. Yet communication problems prevented Kinkade from learning of these reports until 0512, which cost him the opportunity to strike immediately, as he'd sent 16 SBDs some minutes before. Ever cautious, Nagamo had at the same time decided to reverse course to the north after the PBY attacks, launching 14 torpedo bombers to search for the enemy and preparing some 25 fighters for air patrol. One of these B-5Ns would then go on to spot Hornet's task force to the southeast, successfully reporting this sighting by 0700. Immediately, Nagamo ordered his first strike force to prepare for launch. By 0730, a strike force consisting of 64 aircraft under the command of Lieutenant Commander Morata Attack had successfully launched and was heading southeast towards Hornet's location. Half an hour earlier, Kinkade had also received reports that his SBDs had spotted again the vanguard force and Nagamo's carriers, then attempting some failed attacks that cost them 1 bomber. These sightings now placed the enemy between 185 and 200 miles to the northwest. So Kinkade immediately ordered a strike by both carriers. By 0820, Hornet had launched a first wave of 29 planes and a second wave of 26 aircraft, and Enterprise had also dispatched a total of 20 planes, with the 3 forces proceeding separately to their target. At the same time, as Nagamo prepared his second strike force, 2 SBDs managed to execute a remarkable surprise attack that left Zuiho unable to recover aircraft after a single hit. By 0900, however, the Japanese had also launched a total of 46 planes, divided in 2 groups under Lieutenant Commander Seki Mamoru, so Nagamo was throwing all his available strike aircraft at the enemy. Concurrent to the carrier strike, Kondo and Abe were also moving east to join Nagamo's forces so that they could finish off any damaged American vessels. Around 0835, as the American and Japanese strike groups closed into their targets, they saw each other rushing in the opposite direction. Recklessly, when the Japanese spotted Enterprise's group, Murata's escort of 9 Zeros decided to launch an attack on them. In the ensuing dogfight, the Americans lost 3 fighters and 2 TBFs, and the Japanese lost 4 Zeros. Additionally, 2 Avengers, a Wildcat, and the remaining 5 Zeros would have to return to their carriers. At 0840, Shokaku's radar reported Hornet's first wave coming from the southwest. Above his carriers, Nagamo had some 20 Zeros at various altitudes on combat air patrol, while another 3 had been dispatched to cover Abe's forces. By 1910, Hornet's first strike group had spotted Abe's vanguard force, rapidly engaging the 3 Zeros on air patrol. In 2 subsequent and remarkable attacks, the 3 Zeros got to shoot down 2 Wildcats and heavily damaged another 2, leaving Hornet's group without fighter escort at a cost of 2 Zeros lost. Despite this, 14 SBDs under Lieutenant Commander William Whithelm got through the Japanese air patrol and started to dive against Shokaku. More than 4 hits were scored against the carrier, causing extensive damage, but failing to sink the vessel. At 0925, Hornet's second wave then appeared, but as they couldn't locate Nagamo's carriers, they would instead attack the heavy cruiser Chikuma, scoring 3 hits that caused heavy damage, but that didn't sink the vessel. The diminished Enterprise group would be the last to appear, launching attacks against the heavy cruisers Suzuya and Chikuma, but failing to hit either. All in all, the performance of Kinkade's strike had been disappointing, losing 8 aircraft in the attack and only damaging 1 carrier and 1 cruiser. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Commander John Griffin had decided to place 18 Wildcats over Enterprise, 15 fighters over Hornet, and another 4 between the two task forces. In a disastrous move, Griffin's Wildcats were all at 10,000 feet to conserve fuel and oxygen, believing that radar would give them plenty of warning to change altitude. Yet Kinkade's carriers would fail to detect the incoming Japanese strike with their radars. So at 0853, Morata would spot Task Force 17, immediately ordering an attack over Hornet. Just 2 minutes later, Kinkade's carriers finally detected the Japanese, and Griffin ordered his pilots to climb above 10,000 feet, but it was already too late. The bombers of Lieutenant Takahashi Sadamu were the first to attack, although they were rapidly engaged by the Wildcats on air patrol. At a cost of 3 fighters, the Americans shot down 4 bombers and severely damaged 3 others. Takahashi's surviving 7 bombers then began their dives at 0910 in a fully coordinated attack that reduced the effectiveness of anti-aircraft fire. The remarkable dive bombing attack saw Hornet suffer 3 critical hits that created an 11-foot hole and caused explosions after 2 bombs penetrated 3 decks. With 2 groups attacking in an anvil formation from both bows of the carrier, Morata then led his torpedo bombers to strike at the carrier. At this point, however, Griffin had sent some of Enterprise's Wildcats south, while Hornet turned northeast to force Morata into a disadvantageous stern attack. Morata himself led 3 5BNs to launch the first attack, successfully dropping their torpedoes from a bad angle and at a cost of 2 bombers, including the experienced Morata. The result was devastating, with 2 torpedo hits causing the carrier to stop. As Hornet continued to turn northwest, Morata's remaining 8 bombers would have to attack with an even worse angle. They would fail to hit the carrier or the cruiser Pensacola and would further lose 3 B-5Ns. A second group of 6 dive bombers would then start their attack, although they would be engaged by Enterprise's Wildcats coming from the north, losing 1 D-3A. The remaining 5 attacked Hornet, but failed to hit her, although 1 pilot would crash his aircraft onto the carrier, thus starting large fires. The last groups of Japanese aircraft would then be engaged by the Wildcats, suffering heavy losses and scoring no hits. Only 1 damaged D-3A pilot would manage to skillfully crash into the carrier's side, starting a large fire on the dead ship. Morata's attack resulted in one of the finest coordinated strikes by Japanese aircraft, leaving Hornet dead in the water, but paying a hefty price as only 15 planes managed to return, thus losing many experienced pilots such as Morata. Now, however, Seki's second wave was approaching Enterprise. Yet again, Kinkade's radars failed, and the Japanese were only met with 8 Wildcats at 10,000 feet and 13 more at lower altitudes. Attacking in 3 groups, Seki's bombers managed to score 2 hits on Enterprise, destroying 10 aircraft on deck, though they failed to cause serious damage. Despite the ineffective air patrol, the American anti-aircraft fire proved to be deadly for the Japanese, successfully shooting down 3 bombers, including that of Seki. The last group of B-5Ns then arrived by 1040, although they wouldn't get through the Wildcat patrol, only managing to score a critical torpedo hit over the destroyer Smith. If they had scored only 1 torpedo hit over Enterprise, then the carrier might have been left to suffer Hornet's fate, so Griffin's Wildcats did a good job dealing with these torpedo bombers. In a bizarre set of events, however, the destroyer Porter would then be hit by a torpedo from an Avenger that was ditching, and the destroyer would later be scuttled due to its damage. Finally, after closing range with the Americans, the carrier Junyo had launched a strike force of 36 aircraft by 0905. They would start to reach their target by 1121, undetected by Kinkade's radars, thus facing few enemy Wildcats on patrol. Despite this, Junyo's D-3As only scored 1 hit on Enterprise due to the heavy anti-aircraft fire, causing more damage on the carrier. Additionally, the battleship South Dakota and the light cruiser San Juan would also be hit once, suffering moderate damage. As Nagamo prepared more strikes with the few aircraft he could spare, and Kondo headed towards the last known position of the Americans, Kinkade decided to withdraw at 1135 leaving behind Hornet, while Enterprise carried 84 planes on board. Nagumo also withdrew with the damaged Shokaku and Zuiho, leaving Admiral Kekuta to command Zuikaku. During the afternoon, Junyo and Zuikaku would send more strikes towards the enemy, successfully disrupting Northampton's attempt at towing Hornet, and finally forcing Halsey to scuttle the carrier. Kondo would then continue to pursue the Americans for the night, but the Battle of the Santa Cruz Islands was essentially over. This was an impressive victory, but also a Pyrrhic one for the Japanese, sinking one enemy carrier, damaging another among other vessels, and destroying 81 American aircraft. But in the words of Nagumo, it was not an overwhelming victory. And although they had only suffered some damage on 2 carriers, the Japanese had lost 99 aircraft and a total of 148 experienced aircrew. Because of an institutionalized limited capacity in its naval aircrew training programs, and an absence of trained reserves, the Japanese would have a hard time replacing its lost veteran carrier aircrew in the future, so its air power would be severely weakened after this battle. This also shattered Yamamoto's hope to win a decisive victory against the enemy, and as a punishment, Nagumo was then relieved from his command and reassigned to shore duty in Japan. This has been a very long episode for a very important battle, but this is all for this week. And thanks again to Conflict of Nations, the real-time grand strategy game for domination of an online world. Get the game via our link in the description to get an exclusive gift, 13,000 gold and 1 month of premium subscription for free, but only for the next 30 days, so get in there now and fight your way to victory. In the next week, join us as we cover a great variety of actions, both on Guadalcanal and on New Guinea. If you don't want to miss that episode, make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button to see it. Please consider liking, commenting and sharing, it helps immensely. Our videos would be impossible without our kind patrons and YouTube channel members, whose ranks you can join via the links in the description to know our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our Discord and much more. This is the Kings and Generals channel, and we will catch you on the next one.